It says. Oof. Floyd, how would you feel if your children were at risk for prostitution, poverty, suicide, mental health issues, drug addiction? Under the guise of protection. ChildrenRights.org says, on any given day, there are nearly 437,000 children in foster care in the United States. In 2018, nearly 690,000 children spent time in U.S. foster care. On average, children remain in state care for nearly 2 years, and 6% of children in foster care have languished there for 5 or more years. Despite the common perception that the majority of children in foster care are very young, the average of kids entering care is 8. In 2018, 1/3 of children entering U.S. foster care were young people of color. While most children in foster care live in family settings, a substantial minority, 10%, live in institutions or group homes. In 2018, more than 71,000 children whose mothers and fathers' parental rights had been legally terminated were waiting to be adopted. 71,000 children whose mothers and fathers' parental rights had been legally terminated were waiting to be adopted. In 2018, more than 17,000 young people aged out of foster care without permanent families. Research has shown that these who leave care without being linked to forever families have a higher likelihood than youth in the general population to experience homelessness, unemployment, and incarceration as adults. While states should work rapidly to find safe, permanent homes for children, they benefit off of not. Sorry, Children'sRights.org. Let's look up more. Oh, honey, I've been here. You just need to call. Well, all right. 2016. Investigate West. All right, let's see here. InvestigateWest.org. Crisis in foster care system leaves kids rootless. All right. Reading from InvestigateWest.org. Children entrusted to state care after they are abused or neglected by their parents, or when accused of such, are bouncing between hotels and other emergency housing and even being shipped out of state with growing frequency, victims of severe shortage of foster homes. More than a decade after the courts ordered the state to reduce excessive moves among foster kids, some still find themselves uprooted dozens of times in a matter of months. This instability ultimately costs taxpayers. It increases foster children's use of mental health services, which are already unavailable in the state of Oregon. As adults, foster kids are more likely to be jailed, have unintended pregnancies, abuse drugs, and be unemployed. Experts say the extreme rootlessness experienced by some makes them more likely to fall victim to those perils. An investigation by Investigate West for KCTS9 and Crosscuts shows an uptick in foster children who move so often for so long that children have become what experts dub homeless in foster care. It's just inflicting more trauma to some of the most vulnerable youth, says Patrick Dowd, the state official in charge of investigating complaints about foster care system. The investigation included a review of state records and dozens of interviews with social workers, foster parents, and others involved in the foster care system. In an internal email obtained by Investigate West, the administrator in charge of state's Puget Sound area foster care system in July described the situation as a crisis. With no place else to take the foster children, social workers have increasingly resorted to housing kids in hotels at night, then babysitting them in state child welfare offices during the day. In June alone, foster kids as young as 2 had 211 hotel stays. Kids as young as 2 had 211 hotel stays. More than any other month since the state welfare ombudsman began receiving complaints about the practice 2 years ago. The state has grown so desperate that it pays some foster parents up to $3.25 a night, more than 10 times the usual daily rate, to board children from bedtime till morning. It stashes under children in group facilities for runaways and youths with severe mental health problems, not because they need such close monitoring, but because there are no regular foster families to take them. This can add up to 10, 20, even 50 moves in a matter of months for young children as well as unruly teens. Earlier this year, for example, a 4-year-old was moved between 10 different families over 3 months and also spent several nights in hotels, according to the records obtained by Investigate Northwest. I wonder how many of those nights their parents prayed that they could tuck them in at night, like I do mine. Yes. With each move, kids' behavior often worsens. That's called a trauma response, making it harder to find a foster family or even a group facility able to deal with them. Hey Floyd, where'd you go? I don't hear you banging around. Is this upsetting? With each kid's moves, behavior often worsens, making it harder to find foster family or even a group family able to deal with them. Many eventually flee to the streets where they are more likely to be a victim of sex trafficking and violence. If we do not care for these children appropriately, we know, unfortunately, that they then move into homelessness, into our juvenile justice and other public care systems. And Bill Grimm, a lawyer with the National Center for Youth Law, said Bill Grimm, a lawyer with the National Center for Youth Law. So they add to the cost that we then have for taking care of them down the road. Bill Grimm states that once this happens, so they add to the cost that we then have for taking care of them down the road. Evidence of such harm to foster kids helped Grimm and other advocates win a 2004 settlement requiring the Washington Department of Social Health Services to give foster kids more stability. Once the state met that goal, though, court monitoring of moves stopped. And moves are increasing again, according to the state records. Social workers and foster parents themselves. I think that emphasizes the lack of accountability, not only in our state, but the surrounding states. Over the past year, we would get emails with 20 kids needing homes on them, saying it's a crisis, we need placement, help us, said Seattle foster mom Lauren Hubbard, who adopted her daughter Angelique Kelly, 15, out of foster care. In 3 years in foster care, Angelique moved 17 times, an average. In nearly 3 years foster care, Angelique moved 17 times, an average of once every 2 months. It took Hubbard weeks to convince her to unpack her suitcase.
And it was probably a trash bag.
Babies.
Just saying, from my own experience.
Oh, I know. That's because they don't let them have their backpack when they move. It gets put in a pile with the other shit they don't get returned to them. As with many foster kids, those moves left Angelique struggling in school. With all of her school changes, no one had stopped to figure out if she had dyslexia. I just felt stupid, she said. She's still 4 or 5 years behind. Amid all those moves, Angelique says her heart broke into 17 pieces. So with each move, her heart broke. A major driver of the placement crisis and a large decrease in the number of available foster homes, a topic we'll cover in a forthcoming story. While the state for decades had about 6,000 foster homes, over the last 8 years that number has dropped to about 5,000. You want me to keep going?
Yeah.
At the same time, the number of kids removed from their homes was increased in the past few years after falling during the recession, likely due in part to skyrocketing rates of heroin and prescription opioid addiction. Neglect due to parents' drug addiction is a common reason for kids coming into the system. Other youths have been abused physically or sexually or otherwise severely mistreated by their parents or guardians, as claimed by the state. Beyond recruiting more foster parents, longtime observers say that new approaches are needed to care for the growing number of foster children with severe mental health and behavioral troubles. The more we get involved, the more we realize just how broken the system is, said Dan Hammer, an associate pastor at Overlake Christian Church in Redmond who oversees support services for foster and adoptive families, has also taken in foster kids himself. We can't just keep repeating the same thing and think, oh, We just need more. Better recruitment, better retention of foster parents, Hammer said. You're not going to get that until you change some of the fundamental problems within the system. Some of the most promising fixes include training and paying highly skilled foster parents, expanding mental health services for the most troubled kids, and paying experienced social workers enough to keep them around. I think accountability is the number one thing here, but what do I know? But these solutions all cost money that would have to come from the Washington State Legislature. Meanwhile, the legislature has yet to fully restore the steep recession-area budget cuts that trimmed more than 15% of children's administrator workers, froze social worker salaries, and slashed services for foster children and parents.
Why am I not crying alligator tears over that one?
You know, people who really love children would do that job without needing that payment.
Yeah.
It's called volunteering for a cause.
Right.
The DSHS administrator in charge of the foster care system acknowledges that the agency, even if it were properly funded, needs to expand options beyond traditional foster families. I don't necessarily support that comment, but we, like many child welfare systems, have clung to the foster care model and rightly or wrongly have used that as a solution. Let me repeat that. That was, we, like many child welfare systems, have clung to the foster care model and rightly or wrongly have used that as a solution, said Jennifer Struss, the DSHS Assistant Secretary who heads the Children's Administration. We are a reactive agency just by the nature of what we do, and I don't think that we probably were looking ahead as much as